Although he later became a French citizen, Théophile Alexandre Steinlen was born in Lausanne, Switzerland in 1859. Despite his obvious facility for visual art, he studied theology at the University of Lausanne, but following graduation from this odd choice of subject, he did start work as a trainee designer at a textiles factory in Mulhouse in eastern France. But Steinlen was considerably more interested in the possibility of a career as an artist, and in 1881, with his young wife Emily, he somewhat rashly gave up his job and moved into the bohemian artistic community in the Montmartre district of Paris. He was fortunate to be quickly befriended by the successful artist and illustrator Adolphe Willet, and he brought Steinlen into his circle of like-minded associates, who spent much of their leisure time at Le Chat Noir Cabaret and Bar. In 1883, as one of several illustrators, he produced a single drawing for La Rêve d'un Viveur, a play by Jean-Louis Debout de la Forest. And a year later his illustrations started being published regularly in the pages of Le Chat Noir's eponymous journal. At only 4 pages it was little more than a weekly pamphlet, but Steinlen featured in virtually every published copy. Most of his work was sequential, frequently wordless, and his humorous, well-observed sequences involving cats quickly became a particularly popular aspect of his work. In 1885, Steinlen began an enduring and profitable professional relationship with the cabaret performer Aristide Bruant, who had been a major attraction at Le Chat Noir. In that year, Bruant opened his own cabaret, Le Mirliton, and Steinlen created promotional material based on the performer's songs and monologues. In 1887, he undertook his first significant book illustration commission with a series of pen drawings for a humorous collection of stories by Charles Joliet, titled Roman Incohérent. And only a year later, he had another success with his colour cover design and yet more pen and ink monochromes for the book Les Gaietés Bourgeois by Jules Moineau. He was also responsible for the cover and a few page illustrations for La Comédie des Jouets by Camille Lemonnier, a joint project with other respected illustrators of the period. Steinlen continued to enjoy some success as a painter, but he was much more in demand for his illustrations, and among other projects in 1889 he illustrated Dans la Rue, a collection of songs and monologues written and performed by his friend and client Aristide Bruant. Like everything connected with Bruant at the time, it was a considerable popular success. By the end of the decade, Steinlen was also creating cover illustrations for sheet music of the popular songs written by others, as performed in the many music halls and cabarets which proliferated in Paris at the time. In this capacity, he produced a large volume of charming, typically fin de siècle images as lithographic drawings, which were then coloured in pink and blue tones, most probably with the pochoir stencil method. But I stress I don't know that for sure. Whatever the process used to create these covers, they were uniformly light of touch and, just like the songs themselves, romantic in their subject matter. In 1890, Steinlen's first poster, a particularly complex composition for an orientally themed ballet, was published, and more would follow in the ensuing years. But in the meantime, he continued to have some success with his art, much of which documented and celebrated the Parisian nightlife he was an enthusiastic part of. And among other painted works, he created this now iconic watercolour of the feral cats who wandered the alleys and rooftops of Montmartre. In 1891 he started to create colour covers and page illustrations for a new resurrected publication of the humour magazine La Caricature, although judging by the evidence this appears to have been fairly short-lived. But his professional association with Aristide Bruant continued to thrive, and he was producing a large volume of cover and page illustrations for Bruant's Le Mirliton weekly journal. By this point, their symbiotic relationship had made the two virtually inseparable in the minds of the Parisian public. And in 1893, Steinlen was commissioned to illustrate a collection of verse written by Bruant and several of his contemporaries, including Jean Richepin and Paul Bourget. When it came to politics, Steinlen was a staunch socialist, and in the same year he expressed his support for the French working class and his contempt for those who exploited them in the large volume of covers he created for the brief run of the magazine La Chambarde Socialiste. For this work he used the alias Petit Pierre in case it drew unwanted attention from the authorities. Having said that, it was glaringly obvious that it was his work, created in his usual distinctive and expressive drawn style, so it wasn't a particularly successful subterfuge. Steinlen was less prolific as a poster artist than some of his contemporaries, but in 1894 he picked up where he had left off earlier with this rather melancholy extreme portrait formatted image for the singer Yvette Gilbert, and a highly popular, more sentimental poster advertising sterilised milk, featuring a little girl modelled by his own daughter and a collection of hopeful cats. And he used cats again as the focus of the poster he designed for his own exhibition of work in a private gallery in the same year. At this time, Steinlen was working at a level of productivity which suggests he never slept, and there were more book cover designs produced, more posters, and his ongoing work for Aristide Bruant, among others. In 1895 he made his debut on the cover of Le Rire magazine, and also began creating covers and other illustrations for the magazine Gil Blas, frequently with scenes of romance and suggested sexual dalliance. He also designed this popular poster for Tea and Drinking Chocolate, which featured portraits of his wife, daughter and pet cat in the charming domestic scene he created. It was also the year in which he illustrated the cover and inner pages of Chansons de Montmartre, a volume which collected the lyrics for songs written by the highly popular composer Paul Delmet, and more followed over the next few years. And in 1896 he produced what is undoubtedly now his most iconic and enduring image, with this elegantly designed and uncharacteristically flat graphic poster for a national tour by the performers of Le Chat Noir. Steinlen was simultaneously maintaining his successful career as an artist too, but by the last decade of the 19th century his magazine illustrations and posters had become as ubiquitous and revered in Paris as his now better known contemporary Henri de Toulouse Lautrec. He was still designing book covers too, and in addition to his gloomy cover design for Soliloquies of the Poor by Jehan Richtus, he illustrated the contents with highly textural, atmospheric crayon monochromes, which further reflected the particularly downbeat narrative with considerable empathy. In 1898 he returned to his beloved cats for the cover of his portfolio of remarkably expressive and occasionally humorous feline drawings, which was well received by the public and the critics. But in the same year Steinlen began creating more politically motivated illustrations for the fiercely socialist journal titled Les Feuilles de Zoaxa, the name by which the Belgian writer Alphonse Gallo de la Pérouse was better known. Like its namesake, the journal was anti-militaristic and anti-authoritarian, and the propagandist nature of Steinlen's bitter but eloquent lithographic covers, portraying a city in a state of some social dissatisfaction, matched the written content very well. Oddly, unlike his earlier radical images for Le Chambarde Socialiste, he used his own name for this somewhat notorious and contentious publication, seemingly without any consequent repercussions. In 1900 he also created this dramatic Millicent poster for Le Petit Sou, yet another like-minded journal. And closer inspection of this image serves to reveal just how sophisticated his technique was in the creation of remarkably solid imagery through the use of stone lithography. But on a conspicuously lighter note, he also published a charming children's picture book titled Folle Journée, about a group of cats making various kinds of mayhem around the home. All the illustrations were created with pen and watercolour washes, and unlike his posters, printed chromolithographically. This seems to be the only time he got involved with illustrations for children, which on this rather engaging evidence seems a pity. In 1901 he took French nationality and continued to both celebrate and castigate his adopted country for its virtues and vices in all his various creative outcomes. It was in that year that he published Dans la Vie, a collection of 100 drawings of various aspects of everyday Parisian life, which were created as black and white lithographs with a limited palette of spot colours added at print. And although they were nothing like as politically motivated as his socialist magazine illustrations, they were another honest journalistic portrayal of the world he saw around him. A year later he followed this collection with another of similar quality, this time titled Les Petites Ouvrières Parisiennes, which concentrated on all manner of familiar females from the top to the bottom of society. Steinlen continued to paint, and as with his illustration career, it was very much in the ascendant. And in addition to more feline paintings, he also found time to create numerous equally absorbing feline sculptures. Although best known as the lithographer, Steinlen also created a large volume of etchings, which, although resolutely gloomy in both their subject matter and graphic execution, sold very well as limited edition prints to collectors of contemporary art. Similarly, in 1902, he was responsible for an entire issue of the magazine L'Assiette au Beurre, in which he commemorated the death of the writer Victor Hugo, with a series of nightmarish single and double-page illustrations inspired by Hugo's work, all of which made for particularly uneasy viewing in a supposedly humorous magazine. And the rest of the first decade of the century unfolded pretty much identically to previous decades, featuring a dazzling mix of images created for any number of printed outcomes, some of which were determinedly frivolous and overtly commercial, alongside an equal measure of socially motivated, more serious-minded imagery and journalistic observation. In 1910 he returned to the work of the poet Jean Richepin for La Chanson des Gueux, with a collection of artfully composed title pages, rendered expressively in charcoal. These images, like so much of his work, revealed his genuine empathy for the more impoverished among France's population. A year later he started publishing his own weekly magazine, Les Humoristes, which survived only for a few months before collapsing due to general indifference from the public. But despite this setback and no doubt blow to his pride, there was no shortage of work from elsewhere, and his career continued to be every bit as successful as previously. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Steinlen was already too old at the age of 55 to be considered fit to be slaughtered. But he created a considerable volume of images, many of them based on two separate visits to the front. Some of these were for publication, but most were etchings which formed a bitter record of the miseries suffered by the fighting men in the form of limited edition prints. There were also a large number of posters created to promote events intended to raise money for the many refugees the conflict created. Unlike many of his contemporaries, not once did he create images directly condemning the German enemy or their leaders, but confined himself instead to graphically depicting the pity of the situation and the human suffering war inevitably brings. The war ended in 1918, and although immediately after the ceasefire Steinlen did create a couple of posters and an equally minimal amount of magazine work, he spent what would be the last years of his life working predominantly as an artist, making paintings and prints of still lifes, portraits and landscapes, and of course there were yet more cats. And Théophile Steinlen died from a heart attack in Paris in 1923 at the age of only 64. Despite his early exit from this world, he had created an astonishing volume of illustration and art during a 40-year career. That Steinlen had been entirely self-taught makes the depth and range of his skills as a draftsman and his enduring visual imagination all the more remarkable. Above all, it's the humanity of the work he created, whether politically motivated or simply as observations of everyday life, which makes his accumulated body of work such a vital contribution to the development of modern illustration. And although he is now far from what might be called obscure, it seems to me that Steinlen is yet another who is not as fully appreciated as he should be. And I hope this video brings him at least a little more well-deserved attention and respect.